Well, hey everybody, I'm Sam. I'm a student of the Bible. I'm a pastor and I'm a writer, and my training involves biblical studies, theology, and biblical languages. I teased out on a short earlier today that I wanted to go after the question, what is an apologist? What's apologetics? Why do critical Bible scholars treat those two words as if they're like a four-letter word? And should they do that? What are some of the bigger issues with that? What's my experience with things like apologetics? And then I have something I've been observing that I just wanted to say about some of this stuff. I've talked a lot about on my channel before about, like, why do critical Bible scholars not like univocality. I've talked about the difference between critical and confessional scholars. So I just thought, hey, let's talk about this. I've been seeing it more and more and more pop up on YouTube and on like platforms like TikTok and Twitter and that kind of stuff, where it just seems like these two camps, apologists and critical Bible scholars, are just in this battle with one another, of picking out each other's videos and just ripping them apart, and trying to like argue and fight online with this stuff. Here's the deal: I've only been on YouTube now for 3-4 months doing this kind of content. But I have been a pastor for 22 years. I've been studying the Bible for that plus more. And I've been around critical Bible scholarship and around apologetics for a really long time, and I've seen this go on and on and on and on. A couple of my mentors have talked about their whole journey with all of this stuff, and this whole thing has been going on for like a couple hundred years. So my point is this: it's not a new argument, but with the rise of social media and all this kind of stuff, it becomes right out in the forefront, where people can be engaged in this stuff maybe it wasn't as this accessible back in the day. So anyway, I want to talk about, I wrote out an outline because I don't want to do this off the top of my head because it's really difficult to try to go after all that. So my outline, I have a bunch of questions. What is an apologist? What are apologetics? Can apologetics be a good thing? What's the difference between presuppositional apologetics and the historical scientific method of theory and hypothesis? What's the difference between those two things? What is my experience with apologetics? And then what do I see as the big issue between critical Bible scholarship and critical Bible scholars and apologists? And what is the biggest issue going on right now? Why is this whole thing what do I see in this whole thing? So let's go right back to the beginning. So what is an apologist? Why do we even have that term, whatever? Well, it kind of goes back to 1 Peter 3:15. Okay, so I'm just going to read this in the NIV because I think it says it pretty well. And then we're going to go and look at a couple of Greek words where we get the idea of apologetics from. Okay, so 1 Peter 3:15 says this. It says, "But in your hearts revere Christ as Lord. Always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you to give the reason for the hope that you have, but do this with gentleness and respect." Okay, so that's 1 Peter 3:15, and the word there, answer. Okay, always be prepared to give an answer for the hope that you have within you. That's where we get this idea from apologetics from, and it actually comes from the Greek word where we translate the word answer. It actually means defense for. Okay, one of the things I want to point out here, though, is that, and I don't see a lot of this happening, especially from an apologetic standpoint, and I don't see it happening from critical scholar standpoint either. But it says, "But do this with gentleness and respect." Well, number one, it says to have a defense and answer for the hope that you have. Okay, not for why you think the Bible is what it is, like for the hope that you have. That's the point of the reason or the answer. But then it says, "Do this with gentleness and respect." And I got to tell you, social media does not lend itself to gentleness and respect, especially in the comment sections. and especially with the way we can stitch videos back and forth with each other, and those are not usually the things that pop out from an apologetic standpoint. Just wanted to say that. Okay, so let's go over to the Greek text here of 1 Peter 3:15. And I'm only going to get up to the point where it says, where we talk about this word that we derive the word apologetics from. Okay, so it says, Kurion de ton Christon agiasate and tes cardies umon, which means, however, set apart Christ as Lord in your hearts. All right, then it says, etimi ei pros apologian panti to etunti umas logon peri tes en umin elpidos ala meta prophtetos ke phobu. And what that means is always be ready. So that's etimi ei, and then pros apologian, for a defense or for an answer or a reason. Panti, for everyone or to everyone. That's the dative, so it's to everyone. To etunti, those who are asking, umas, you, logon, peri, for a word concerning, tes en umin, elpidos, the hope in you. Allah is yet or but, meta, with and prophtetos, gentleness, ke is and then phobu is fear, but I think the word phobu here actually means more of like a reverence or respect, okay? So the word we're looking at here is the word apologion, okay? And it comes from the, the root word apologia, okay, or apologia. And that's where we get the word apologetics from, apology. And then back in the day when they were using it then, apology didn't mean to say I'm sorry. An apology was like a legal defense for something. Okay, so an apologist is, quite literally, the dictionary defines it this way. An apologist is a person who offers an argument in defense of something, right? And in the case of what we're talking about, an apologist is someone who provides a defense of the faith. Okay, so that's basically what it is. It gets used, though, and I'm going to talk about this a little bit later, but it gets used for any person who of faith who is talking about the Bible. So if they have a faith root to them, and that they talk about the Bible, then they're an apologist. They get swept into that category. And I don't think that's quite a fair assessment, but I'll talk about that later. Okay, so an apologist is actually someone who provides a defense or wants to try to defend their faith. And they have an argument for that. So then the question then is, what are apologetics? Okay, apologetics basically are the defense from an apologist. Duh. But I think a better term, a better way to say it is that apologetics are answers or defenses of a set of pre-held beliefs. And so I'll give you for an example. Okay, an example of an apologetic is that I come to any topic, whatever, with an already held belief, and I'm looking for evidence for that belief, okay? And so an apologetic would be something like, I already believe that God is the creator of the universe. Therefore, I'm going to try to find all of the arguments that back up my premise to prove my point. That's an apologetic, right? It's using arguments, defending something that I already pre-held to, or already pre-believed. It's not coming to something, seeing it, and then believing it, based on data and all that kind of stuff. It's quite literally, I already believe something, and now I'm looking for a defense for the thing I believe. And so that's what an apologetic is, basically. Now, can apologetics be a good thing? That's the question I want to chase after for a second. Depends on who you ask. And it depends on what it is, right? So I would say yes with a giant asterisk. I would say yes, but it depends on two things. The first thing it depends on is what presuppositions the apologist is bringing to the argument. And if there can be an agreement on those presuppositions. That's a big deal. And I think that if an apologist brings presuppositions to an argument that no one wants to agree upon and say, well, you can't presuppose those things, well, then it's not going to be an argument in good faith. It's just going to be an argument based. It's going to be a zero-sum game. It's going to be an argument that they're already won because their presupposition will always lend themselves to that. If the other person doesn't agree to it, then it's like, what's the point of the argument, right? So I think it can be a good thing, but it depends on what the presuppositions the apologist is bringing to the argument. And then number two, can they argue their points free of fallacy and with data, logic, and reason alongside of their beliefs and alongside of their faith? And that is a big one. Can they argue in a fallacy-free way? And do they have data, logic, and reason with that they can actually back up and say, look at this data here, look at this data here, that goes alongside of their belief and their faith that they hold on to. So I think it can be a good thing, but it really depends. It really depends on what they presuppose and how they want to argue and what they want to use in their arguments. I will say this, a lot of apologetics that I see on things like YouTube and even on TikTok and that kind of stuff, those are not always in good faith. Though a lot of times there are presuppositions that are brought that it's kind of like, well, of course, if you're going to bring that presupposition, then you can make it say whatever you want to say. Or there's fallacies left and right and all this kind of stuff, and you just kind of go, wow, what's going on here? I think it can be a good thing. It can be used for a good thing because it does provide an answer, it provides a defense, but it depends on what we're bringing to the table. Okay, what's the difference between presuppositional apologetics and the historical scientific method of like theory, hypothesis, testing, all that kind of stuff? Realistically, more often than not, I think apologists are pretty guilty of this, that they will only chase down the data as long as it confirms their already held beliefs. There's a lot of confirmation bias sometimes in what goes on with apologetics, because if the data ends up disagreeing with the presupposition, guess which one wins? The presupposition wins, right? The apologist usually then goes, well, let's look for different data. Let's look for more data that agrees with my presupposition. That gets me to the place where I can go, well, there's a possibility that this is true, kind of a deal, with the whole idea of historical critical methods. It's like if there's a theory or a hypothesis we put out, we chase it down, and if the data doesn't agree with it, then it gets abandoned and we do go on to something else because the data didn't work. And so it really does come down to presuppositions and what people are willing to chase and how long they're willing to chase it and what they will want the data to actually say versus what they presuppose it to say. So that's the big difference between those two things, right? So then the question is, well, what's my experience with things like apologetics? I don't have a lot of experience with it. Some people might say, well, yeah, you do because you're a pastor, you went to all these schools. I'll address that in a second, but I don't have a ton of experience with what I would consider to be apologetics, apologists, all that kind of stuff. And here's what I mean by that. I took a couple classes in my undergrad and one, like partly in my in seminary that dealt with some of this kind of stuff. The one in undergrad was fascinating because I'll show you why. The very first book we had to read was this book right here called Attacking Faulty Reasoning by T. Edward Dahmer. This was all about how not to argue in a fallacious way. Like a fallacy-free way of arguing. And you go through all the fallacies in here and how to avoid those fallacies, examples of the fallacies, all that kind of stuff. It's a really good book if you want to get into arguing in a way that's fallacy-free. I would suggest that book. Here's the irony of it. The book that we also read side by side with that was this book by Norman Geisler called When Skeptics Ask. Okay? A handbook on Christian evidences. Okay? And then right on the inside cover, it says, When Skeptics Ask. And that word skeptic there, I think that's part of the problem. Oh, well, I'll get to that. And then 1 Peter 3:15, always be prepared to give an answer. So there it is. There's all kinds of stuff in here. What I found ironic, even back then, I was like, how old? Like 20 years old back then? We were going through this stuff. What I found ironic was the pairings of these two books. Because I will tell you that after reading this book and then reading this book, I was like, why are we reading this book when there are so many of these in this book? Circular reasoning, straw men, red herrings. It's just really fascinating. So that was, as I started reading through this, I was like, oh, this is how we're going to do this? Okay. Even back then. And then one other book that we had to read as a part of one of our pastoral classes that was about that was actually an apologetic kind of book, was this book called The Coming Evangelical Crisis, with all these, guys in here, John MacArthur, R.C. Sproul, Albert Mohler, Kent Hughes, all of the classical fundamentalist evangelical guys, right? And then the title at the top of the book says, Current Challenges to the Authority of Scripture and the Gospel. And a couple of years ago, I remember seeing this on my shelf, and I was like, how did they know? That's whatever, a little bit of humor. Anyway, this is like quite literally my experience with apologetics, and I don't really want to really engage in some kind of a defense of the faith kind of a deal. I just literally try to go after, okay, what do I see Scripture saying? Does it? And my presuppositions are going to be very different than a lot of apologists are going to be. So I don't. When I read some of this stuff, I'm like, well, they have to say this because they're coming from a place where their presupposition is verbal plenary inspiration. So they have to say it this way, or else the whole thing blows up and falls apart. That kind of stuff. So anyway, my experience with apologetics has been a fascinating road. What's the big issue between critical Bible scholars and apologists? Why they keep arguing with each other? Why they keep picking apart each other's videos? Why they keep doing this? In my opinion, could just be my opinion, for me, the bottom line is that both apologists and critical Bible scholars are criticizing the other for misrepresenting the text. That's it. They both have their own ways of seeing the text, and they're both criticizing the other side for how they see the text. That's just the way it is. You can watch any critical Bible scholar on YouTube or on TikTok, and when they're pointing out all of the misrepresentation of scholarship from an apologist, it's like, well, they're misrepresenting the text. They're misrepresenting the text. Then you go watch that apologist's channel, and then they're picking all the biblical scholars, and they're misrepresenting the text. They're misrepresenting the text. They're misrepresenting, and they're just back and forth, lobbing these grenades back and forth to each other. And here's what I find is the bigger problem than that. And this is just a thing I'm seeing, and a thing that is kind of discouraging sometimes. The bigger issue for me is with both camps, what ends up happening is that the words we use to describe each other in this whole exchange tend to end up being trigger words for the bases of people who like them. So if you are someone who really like follows critical biblical scholars, and when they use the word apologist or apologetics, it's like a trigger word that means this person can't be trusted. Their scholarship's no good, whatever. Like they I saw this lately. Someone wrote about N.T. Wright, and they were like, well, N.T. Wright did it, and all of a sudden the word apologist came across the thing, and it was like, now we have to just mistrust every part of his scholarship that he says because of this, and it's like, okay, like time out, like, and apologists do this too, and the trigger word that they use is skeptic, the skeptical scholar, they'll use that word skeptic there, and it's like a trigger word for their base to say this person isn't, you can't trust them. They're cynical in their approach to the Bible. They end up saying things like, well, they just want to wreck people's faith and all that. And their base gets all worked up and goes, we knew we can't trust those people in the way that they read the Bible and all that kind of stuff. They're not even Christians, and it just round and round and round this goes. And here's the deal. While I've only been on YouTube here for a few months, I've been in this world for a long time. I've seen this for a long time. And this whole thing has been going on ever since the historical critical method was started being used in a really big way with textual criticism and all that kind of stuff back, in the 1800s. And when they started, digging up stuff, trying to find stuff, and all of a sudden they started going, well, we need to be more critical about this. Ever since then, these two camps have been really just going after each other. And I don't. Here's the thing that discourages me. This is not getting anywhere. Like, it's not. Like, no one on either one of these sides is like, no one's convincing anybody of anything. No one's like, actually, if they have debates with each other, no one walks away from the debate and goes, wow, I think I need to rethink my position on this. No, each side thinks that they really did a good job. Like, and then they go back to their corners and they talk about how the other people didn't do what they're like. It's fascinating to me, and it becomes a little discouraging because here's my deal. I'm never going to come at this. You're never going to find me on my channel trying to argue with somebody else about this stuff. I have zero. I may, if someone accuses me of something in the comments or whatever, I may try to explain myself. But I'm not really looking to get into it with somebody else over their position versus my position, whatever. Like, it's just, to me, it becomes just a waste of my time and a waste of what I think. No one really comes away from it going, hey, you know what, I think you're right, or hey, this would be a great point. Like, I just think it just becomes arguments and arguments and arguments, and people just solidify their own bases, and it just doesn't get us anywhere. And I'm watching it happen, and it's like, and I think sometimes apologists have some good points, and they need to, because they're approaching the text very differently sometimes than a critical Bible scholar. And I think critical Bible scholars have really good points sometimes, and they need a lot of times, and they need to be listened to and not just called skeptics all the time. Okay, so I think we could do better than just kind of using trigger words, calling people things, and then let it kind of go from there. That's just my opinion, though. You probably disagree with me. That's okay. But that's my whole take on apologists, apologetics. I'm not always a big fan of classical apologetics, especially when I'm like, wow, they're really jumping through hoops to try to make this thing fit. But I think that's partially because my presuppositions aren't always the same as some of those apologists. And I find myself feeling the same way about Bible scholars sometimes too, critical Bible scholars. Like, they say some things and I'm like, okay. So anyway, that's just kind of where I'm at. And yeah, it's just quite a journey for me on some of this stuff. All right. Well, hopefully this was some good information for you, and I hope to avoid the arguments in the comment section. All right. Give me a like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.